I was still looking for that master key, that ostinato, that riff, the loop that ties the whole wandering character of the song together.
Oh, this is actually kind of a question that ends up sparking existential crisis problems. But how can you stay original in a time where everyone's seen it all? So, like, I feel like all of the basic plots that are possible have kind of been touched on in one way or another.
Yeah.
So you really have to get out there, I feel like, to be original.
Yeah.
Or
you have to be either really weird or you have to be very personal. Mm-hmm. Or you have to say, I just don't pay attention to anybody else. Like, if I accidentally plagiarize someone.
Say, hey, screw it, and I'm just going to make my movie the way I want to.
Yeah.
That doesn't mean that you won't have a bunch of people at the end saying, oh, that's like so-and-so.
Yeah.
But how do you plan on doing it? How do you want to make sure you're not making somebody else's movie?
Yeah. Interestingly, did you know there are several movies that came out this year that have prominent scenes that feature the John Denver song Take Me Home Country Roads? Like, apparently there's 3 or 4 movies that all use it that came out this year.
Wow.
And it's like, how much does it suck to be the 4th guy whose movie comes out? You know what I mean? Like,
did it slip into public domain?
No. So it's really hard to explain.
Was it just a budget cut?
No, it's really hard to explain why. But it's like it's like a parallel thinking thing.
Something happened last year when everybody was, cutting that last shot together.
John Denver's been dead for a long time, so it's not like it's that. You know what I mean? It's not like imagining a bunch of David Bowie and Prince songs turning up in movies this year. It's
just.
Yeah. So it's really hard to explain, but it happened. And it's like, what do you do? I don't know.
Yeah.
But that's a cool question. That's a good question. So as it turns out, there are different kinds of listeners. I took a class on listening, and we learned how some people listen by asking questions. Some people listen by giving advice. Some people listen by relating what you're talking about back to themselves. All 3 of these are acts we tend to villainize, right? Unneeded advice, unwanted questions, making it all about yourself. But the part that we miss is that this person had to listen to you in the first place in order to ask you that suspicious question, in order to give you that condescending advice, in order to tell you that long story about a job they had 20 years ago. I'm not saying that makes them much less of a dick, I'm just saying, they did listen. We all have our own ways of doing things. We all think differently, we all speak differently. It's kind of impressive that we manage to communicate at all, and it's difficult to mourn anything that gets lost in translation. All things considered, we're doing a pretty good job at this. Better than fucking squirrels. And probably a little worse than dolphins, but we don't need to be the top of the list. One of the wildest and most exciting things about having a child is that Christy and I get to help a new person fall into this system. We get to teach Arlo about the basic parameters of communication. Letters of the alphabet, basic sentence construction, writing his own name, core emotional obligations between people, the discography of Conor Oberst. I'm talking bedrock human nature shit here. We get to do it. He's gonna learn an incalculable amount just by watching us. I really hope I don't blow this.
And the piano, in the recording, a lot of people don't hear it, but it adds this like extra percussive texture to it, That was a nod to Bowie.
It's gonna have to be a different man. Time may change me, but I can't trace time.
He had just passed away, and for me, recording is a magical thing that encapsulates a time.
The way that program works, the format is usually the author gets up and speaks from the podium, either reads a piece of his work or talks about his process or his or her process or whatever they want to talk about. They have the floor for 20 minutes. Uh-huh. And then we sit down together and I interview them ask them a handful of questions, and then open it up to questions from the audience. And the whole thing all in is about an hour. Try and keep it to an hour and 10 minutes. And then everybody gets their book signed out in the lobby.
This is Monty Bohannon, the director of marketing for one of my favorite places in the world, the Music Hall in Portsmouth, New Hampshire. I've been going there to see arty movies and concerts for half my life, and Monty's been there the whole time.
This is my 18th season at the Music Hall. I answered an ad in the newspaper for a part-time box office ticket seller. About 6 months later, the assistant box office manager left, and I became assistant box office manager. About 6 months after that, the operations guy, the front of house operations, so the person in charge of house management, volunteers, concessions, he left, and I took on that role. And I ran events for, 6 years. In that time, I sort of picked up managing the IT, because back in those days, we were very, very thin on staff, and the person who had managed the IT had been our technical director for the stage production side, and he left, and so there was a hole. And so I kind of I knew enough about managing and fixing computers to be dangerous, so I kind of took that role over. And then in 2013, the position of director of marketing opened up, and I made a choice to sort of drop the IT piece and move into that role, and sort of had been in that 5 years, had really had sort of a master class in marketing from our former marketing director and the folks there. So yeah, so it's quite an interesting journey.
It's the prototypical got hired in the mailroom, worked your way up to the boardroom kind of story, but for a historic theater.
Yeah.
You don't think that sort of thing is possible, I guess, It's like, especially in a kind of, in the arts field, it's like, it's always a weirder story than that. What I like about your story is that it's like, I answered a want ad and stuck around. Just gradually climbed my way up. Yeah, it's nice.
I sat down with Monty because just a few days earlier, he'd interviewed the author Joe Hill for an event at the Music Hall. Since I'm trying to determine exactly what makes a good question, I thought it was time I interviewed a skilled interviewer about interviews. Yes, it's going to get a little meta.
What does the prep look like when you're interviewing an author? I guess the first part is, do you have to read the book?
Absolutely. I've never done an interview where I've not read at least the newest book.
Yeah.
Usually I like to do a little deeper dive, and if I can't read the back catalog, or if I haven't read the back catalog, the fortunate thing with Joe Hill is I've read everything that he's written since like early days of when he was writing. He wrote a Spider-Man comic, and I remember.
Oh, so you could
really
could bring up some really deep stuff on stage.
Yeah. So it's good to know. It's good to know that back catalog. But at least having read the book, I think that's really important for me.
Yeah.
Because I think it helps you contextualize the questions, and you don't ask questions that are. You get a little deeper. You don't ask questions that are completely surface questions.
Yeah.
And that makes for a good discussion, and the author definitely appreciates it, because a lot of times on the talk shows that people aren't reading his book, or like the talk show interviewer or host, their assistant read the book and fed them questions, and they don't really have a lot of context there.
Yeah.
So it's nice. It's nice to be able to do that, and I've been fortunate in the interviews that I've done that I've had the luxury to have the time to prep and read the book.
Yeah, I was going to say, do you ever worry about? Obviously, when you, like, an opening question shouldn't be like, so on page 47 of this, why did you make this decision with that semicolon? But, like, whenever you have to open an interview, do you ever worry that you're going to get that, like, oh, I've been asked this question a million times, eye roll?
Yeah, I mean, you try. There are always going to be questions that you get, and so in the case of, like, Joe Hill, I tried to really stick to his process and like themes in the book, and so broader, more applicable questions than really specific, questions. And also, you want to be respectful of that artist's sort of no-go zones. So I know for a long time he was really sensitive to being Stephen King's son. Mm-hmm. So I'm not going to ask that question. He's been asked that question a million times. I don't need to bring it up. So those types of things, again, being good at preparation, you do a little bit of that research and you realize, yeah, that's not the direction we want to go. That's, we're better steering clear of that. And it can be any topic. I mean, it can be other authors. Typically you don't want to bring up other writers unless the guest brings them up, those sorts of things.
Oh, that's true. See,
because you never know if there's a beef.
Yeah, this is how I can tell that you're better at asking questions to authors than me, because question 1 to me would have been, why is your name Joe Hill? Shouldn't it be Stephen Prince? Based on the proper line of succession.
Harold Bloom wrote this book called The Anxiety of Influence, which I learned about from an article on Slate about Star Wars. Which is, to be honest, that's the way I learn about most of the canonical, nonfiction, serious, smart person shit. Don't you think it's kind of more fun that way sometimes? It's like almost a little more difficult to gather the meaning of an intelligent piece of writing just from references to it in less intelligent pieces of writing. It might just be the way that millennials with cool Gen X uncles learned to stay culturally afloat. I know, I saw the Simpsons episode parodying Pulp Fiction before I saw the actual Pulp Fiction. Now that was a singular viewing experience, let me tell you. Anyway, the article about Star Wars was, I thought, a mostly pretty sharp and generous look at the way that The Last Jedi engages with ideas like myth and fandom. If I were Rian Johnson, it's exactly the kind of article that I would want someone to write. It frames the movie as 3 intertwined stories about hubris and how you can't kill the past as much as you would like to. Johnson is quoted in the article, saying that the only way to move forward in life is by realizing what you take and leave from the past and not holding on to any of it too closely. Kind of starting to sound like an episode of this podcast, right? The article also talks about crafting a romantic film from ironic fragments, which is one of those things you don't realize you're doing until somebody else puts it into words for you. Yes, that's also what this podcast is. So, Harold Bloom. I looked him up later because the phrase anxiety of influence really spoke to me as a new parent. Bloom's book is about poetry, and he has a bunch of terminology for the way that new poets dealt with the oppressive body of work created by previous generations. How do you define yourself standing in that shadow? He says that there are these revisionary ratios that poets move through, different amounts of each over time. Revisionary ratios, by the way, would make a great title for a band's first EP. And the ratios themselves are another rich vein for band names. Tessera, Kenosis, Esquisses. They all sound like bands I would definitely not listen to, like math rock bullshit like fucking Muse or Rush. Hard pass. So the last revisionary ratio, it's called Apophrades, also sometimes known as the Return of the Dead. So this is when a poet, toward the end of his or her life, more readily opens themselves up to the clear and obvious influence of those who came before. So Bob Dylan. Not that Bob Dylan's reaching the end of his life, he's going to live for 200 more years, but over the last couple of years he's recorded blues albums and a Christmas album and a triple disc set of Sinatra covers. It's a really apophatic move, I would say. And Bob Dylan counts as a poet because the Nobel Prize Committee says so, but really, the revisionary ratios apply to everything in life. Most artists and, just people are currently bouncing through the other 5 ratios, rebelling against those that came before us, or calling our derivative work an homage to cover our asses, or just trying to pretend that nobody else exists. Where are you these days? Are you feeling particularly tesseratic? I get very esquisses-y when Mercury's in retrograde. By the way, I don't actually know what Mercury in retrograde means, but I've read references to it in articles on Slate, so I feel like I'm using it correctly.
you strike me as somebody who is very interested in details of things, since you read the whole back catalog to ask questions. So I can appreciate that, because sometimes I am asking people like process questions, like really mechanical process questions, and I feel like I wonder if anyone cares about the answer to this other than me.
Well, I always think it's interesting from an author or an artist's perspective of how they do the work. What's their routine? What do they, do they prefer a typewriter, a computer? In Joe's instance, he writes out everything longhand, like in notebooks. And I said, I could never do that. There's no way. One, I wouldn't be able to decipher what I had written an hour later. And two, it would just be so painful to then go back and transcribe it. But what he said was it worked for him because he had to unplug. He had to get off the computer screen, and he had to stay away from the distractions inherent in digital devices of social media and getting pulled off onto rabbit holes of Googling things. So I think it's really interesting for an audience to find out, oh, wow, you write this all out, then you go back and you edit, and just getting that idea that art doesn't just spring forth fully formed. Like, there's a lot of work after you get that first draft or that sketch done, that there's a whole lot of other work that goes on, and how a person who is successful at building a career as an artist, what that looks like, what their day looks like. I wake up every morning, I have a cup of coffee, I write for 2 hours, I do X, and what that looks like for different people can really motivate people, others to think about their own creative processes. And that's why those process questions for me are interesting.
Yeah, I definitely think that's true. And I think that's it's a thing that everybody, even people that have realized it, have to be reminded of sometimes. Like, it's a process. You have to actually do the physical work all day long, which it's even helpful for me to remember sometimes. We were just talking about there's a Wilco documentary from years ago called I'm Trying to Break Your Heart. And so much of it is just showing them unplugging a thing and then plugging this thing over here and then playing with this piece of equipment for a while. And you're like, oh, that's right. That's how you do it.
Right.
You have to just mess with the thing.
Poke at it.
Yeah.
One of my favorite podcasts is Song Exploder.
Yes.
I mean, it's Ricky Sherway. He talks to these musicians and it's like, how did you build this thing?
Yeah.
Like, what did you use? And I never listened to those songs the same way after hearing the podcast. I'm like, oh, yeah, that really low thrum I never noticed before. Or, oh my gosh, I didn't realize that those were, these weirdly distorted vocals that came across and they repeat here, 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 and here. It's so cool to get a glimpse of that creative process.
I get excited when there's a Song Exploder episode about a song that I don't like that much, because I'm like, I'm going to like this song by the end.
Right?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Suddenly,
totally.
This is going to be my favorite song.
I have lost a hero, I have lost a friend, but for you, darling, I do it all again.
2016 was the Earth was let's purge ourselves of geniuses. And it's very silly to make something like David Bowie's death about me. I mean, it has nothing to do with me. But I will say that I was really affected, and I cried. I cried for somebody I didn't even know. And I don't know that I've ever done that before. And a lot of people were affected by his death, but it's just, you're like, you can't die.
With writers and other interviews, I tend to almost just give a little seed of a question and then let the person run with it. So I try not to get too specific, so that my own influence or my own conclusions from what I've read or seen don't get in the way of their answer, and it doesn't set them up to say, no, actually, that's completely the opposite of what I intended, and here's why. And so then that can, I've seen it happen. Fortunately, I've never experienced it, but I've seen it happen where then that sets up sort of an antagonistic, and things can quickly spiral out of control, and I don't want that. And it's also, you have to really look at the comfortability of the artist in the interview. So, authors, they sit alone in a room an awful lot of the time, writing by themselves.
Yeah.
Not all of them are comfortable being interviewed. Not all of them are comfortable speaking in public. Some of them are. I mean, Joe Hill's a great example. He is a fantastic public speaker. He can not only write a great story, he can tell a great story, either from the podium or across the table. He's really comfortable in his skin up there. And that's fortunate because you do get authors who you ask a question that should be like a leading, insightful question, and they're like, yeah, well, I guess. And and then it's like you're having to draw them out.
And I imagine that the music hall stop on someone's book tour is often a little different because I guess when I normally think about writers speaking, it's like they're at a bookstore, there's folding chairs, and the reason that I know you is because of your association with my favorite place in the world in Portsmouth, which is the music hall, which is an 800-seat theater. And that's got to be a little intimidating for authors a lot of the time. It sounds like Joe Hill was a little easier to deal with that.
Yeah. I mean, he was really great with the audience, and it can be intimidating. That big stage is, can be daunting. Though I have to say that for stages that size, it's a really warm feeling. Like it's that balcony is shaped like a horseshoe, and it kind of embraces you as you sit on stage. And the other good thing is that the stage lights are so bright that you can't really see past the second or third row. So, it helps that you can be really focused one-on-one with the interviewer, or focused, on the page in front of you if you're reading from the podium.
I've actually always wondered about that with the music hall because I assume most stages, it's hard to see from the stage. But for some reason, when I see people at the music hall, even when I'm not in the first couple rows, I feel like they can see me. And people always, everyone who's never been to the music hall who performs there always immediately comments on their surroundings.
Yeah.
So it's definitely something they notice.
Yeah, it's a great room. I love it. It's again, I think it's one of my favorite rooms in the world. That the auditorium at the Historic Theater. It's so. It's filled with such great energy for over 140 years of performances on that stage. It really holds on to them a lot, so it's great.
I get so excited every time I step in there, even when it's 3 days deep into the film festival and we're on our 30th movie or something. I'm still excited every time I walk through the door. Let's talk about And Then I Go, and then we go to bed.
And then we go.
And Then I Go is a feature-length movie. It'll probably be in theaters, in a couple months or weeks. And it stars Melanie Lynskey and Justin Long, but primarily two boy actors.
Tony Hale.
He's also in it, but he's not one of the boy actors I was referring to.
No.
And it's about two frequently bullied and tormented boys at a school who start planning a school shooting. And I watched this entire movie with just a knot in my stomach.
Mm-hmm.
In part because, we're having a son, and I just felt so strongly for the main boy in particular, and also felt so frustrated that it felt like there were all these people in his life that were trying to reach him and trying to reach out to him in different ways, and they were succeeding sometimes, not succeeding other times, which feels like probably the best you can do in life, in real life, you know? And it didn't help, you know? You just kept marching toward this feeling of inevitability, and it was so upsetting. And yeah, that's kind of what I felt about it. I felt like I love that it took this issue of like, I mean, particularly about like gun violence in schools. It wasn't really about like just mass shootings. It was about Columbine style school shootings. Which that was maybe the one part that didn't totally make sense to me, is when's the movie supposed to take place?
Because they were talking on landlines in their bedrooms.
Yes, but his mom makes reference to social media at one point, but also like there's literally no way like 13-year-old boys would even know Columbine at all, or be there. At one point they're like, well, what was the name of those guys? And the kid's like, I don't know, shut up, fuck you, or whatever. And it's like, that's not a question that a 13-year-old now would ask. 13-year-olds now were not born until like 10 years after Columbine. Mm-hmm. That's like saying like, what were Sacco and Vanzetti's first names? It's like, it's a historical footnote. So it felt weird. But far more importantly, yeah, I was so upset for the entire movie.
Yeah.
I mean, I think it's effective. It's miserable. I don't want to ever have to watch it again. Mm-hmm. And it's miserable without being gory or explicit in any way. And in fact, you know, people were lightly chuckling throughout a lot of the kind of like family interaction, cute little kid stuff that was also going on in the story. But it never changes the fact that you just feel like you're marching toward this thing that's going to happen. And it feels horrible. And like you can't do anything to stop it. My political reading of it, by the way, is that literally the only thing that would have been helpful is if the dad didn't have guns. And there's two different characters in the movie who immediately jump toward guns as a solution to problems because their dads have guns. Both of them say, like he says, "Oh, you should get my dad's gun," and that's why they think of it as a solution. Mm-hmm. So, and I think that's fair. Like, I think people who are gun lovers would like be like, that's a cheap shot kind of thing. But I think it's true. There's no other way a 13-year-old's getting a gun.
Yeah.
So, anyway, yes. It's a very, very, very sad, very upsetting movie. Go see it. Yeah. Really not a big fan of the font choices in that movie.
I don't really feel like I saw fonts.
Like the title font but
honestly, this is the first time I've had real anxiety about the fact that we have a son coming. Mm-hmm. Not son versus daughter. Just that we have somebody who we're responsible for, who is going to have to make decisions, and we can do our best to try and communicate and start this whole atmosphere of support, and it doesn't necessarily mean it's going to do anything. And it just it really just started an anxiety thing for me.
Yeah. It's really scary to think about the fact that you only control a very small percentage of the world that your child inherits. But I did find myself feeling very critical of the parents in the movie.
Yeah.
Like almost nobody else. I felt like Tony Hale, vice principal, he's basically doing what a vice principal does, but occasionally kind of like stepping outside of that role to be a little more like, let me level with you, kid, kind of thing. And I felt like the art teacher is like clearly seeing the need to encourage something in him, but isn't going far enough. But I felt like with the parents, like I felt like the father is like often being very distant with and like sort of put off by like his son's displays of emotion, you know? Like he's kind of like weird, he acts like weirded out by it and like repulsed by it a little bit. And like seemingly can't stick to like whether I'm going to be a jokey guy or serious guy, and it's like it's not working for him. And then I felt like the mother character is a little bit better, but like the part where he like crawls under his bed and he's like laying under his bed, I was like, get down on the floor with him.
Right.
You know? Like don't just stand there and yell at him. Like, and I know that like those parents were like exhausted from previous problems probably, but it just felt like there were things that they could do. And the other thing is that we won't have any guns. So that'll be a big help. But yeah, I feel like it was very well done. I know it's in part just the fact that we have a baby coming is part of why it like grabbed me so hard. But yeah, it was an awful experience.
Yeah. It was definitely a bad note for the night. I wish it was like a different time slot. Maybe we would have felt differently.
Yeah,
too.
I think we need something. We need to come back strong tomorrow. Just coming up very fast, so we should probably go to bed.
It's actually probably already tomorrow. Yeah, it's
Oh,
tomorrow.
holy fuck. Okay. Yep, we gotta go to sleep. So, okay, now, when it comes to moderating, I guess, first of all, at some point you do have to kick it to Q&A, but how many questions do you have still locked and loaded in case the questions are bad or no one has any good questions or no one gets up to the microphone?
Usually, for this particular one, where I know that I've got about 15 to 20 minutes to fill, I'll have anywhere between 10 and 20 questions, because my biggest fear is that like all of my brilliantly thought out, the best questions that I've had, the author answers from the podium in the first 20 minutes.
Yeah.
So I always like to have backup. And then the other thing that I try to do is while I'm sitting, I print out my questions on a piece of paper, and I try and have.
So it's not Jay-Z style. It's not like.
No, don't trust it. Don't trust it. No. But I write them out. I print them out, and then while the author is speaking, like if they go through some of my questions, I'll cross those out. But also, invariably, whatever they say raises more questions. So I have something there that I can then write down in the moment and be able to, when they sit down, be like, oh, that what you said just now resonated with me for something. It did something, and so I want to talk to you about that first before we go into the next thing. So that's always good. And then the other thing that I really practice at is really listening when they're talking. Just like being a good actor on stage is all about listening and reading the person you're on stage with. It's the same thing. Like you've got to be able to really listen to what they're saying, so that maybe the follow-up question that you had planned isn't the next logical question. It could be 3 questions later, or they kind of touched on something that you didn't even think about, and so there's a new question there, and you can kind of scrap the one that you thought you were going to ask. So I feel to have a really good interview, you've got to be able to improvise and adjust on the fly based on what you're hearing, and not be so rigid that you're going by your script, because then it just becomes robotic and you lose some of that flow back and forth. You got to be okay with sort of a digression, even if it means I'm not going to get to this question that I really love, that I really crafted really well, but the conversation turns, and it turns out the question that you didn't think of is the more compelling one for the author, and therefore will be for the audience too.
That's definitely, it gets so meta when we do these interviews about interviews, but it's definitely true, especially when we do for this show, especially the problem is that I'll have all these questions written, and the structure of the episode will be already in my head based on what I think people are going to say, but then I won't get to most of those questions, so then the episode becomes something totally different than it was before. So you have to just be okay with allowing that to happen, and I'm learning to do that. It's nice.
Yeah, it is. It's hard. It's a hard thing to do, especially when you work so hard and do all that research, and then you're like, oh, this is a great question. I can't wait to ask him about this, or I can't wait to see her reaction, and how that process works, or whatever it is. But then to be able to sort of, as the interviewer, to be able to step back and allow the person you're interviewing to be the focus. That's, for me, trying to take a little of my own ego out of it, while still having enough that I have a stage presence, but I'm not the star. Right. I'm not what people are there to see. Right. And just remembering that's really important, because and it's a weird balancing act, and sometimes you have to carry more water or less, depending on the personality of who you're interviewing.
Mm-hmm. What's your move when somebody asks in the audience, asks a bad question?
So yeah, if it's a bad question or a long-winded question, I really take the Diane Rehm approach of thanks, just jumping right in, hey, thanks for your question. Was there a question there? Okay, so what we're gonna say, and help deflect some of that from whoever's sitting in the other chair, and also just try and make it wrap up as quickly as we can. So, I mean, for me, again, I'm trying to gauge who I'm sitting across from. How are they receiving that? What does it look like? How's the audience receiving it? Because it can, if somebody gets up and they're like, blah 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 blah, and let me tell you about my my nephew who's also an author, and can I give you a script before we leave? You just got to cut them off and be okay with that, and move on, because again, you've got such a limited amount of time. You don't want you want to get to some quality questions, and you want to get to some good meaty stuff.
So there's the ending part, the guitar coda, which I made after Bowie died last year. It felt maybe like an elegy in thinking about Bowie when I made it. And, it goes on for a long time, way too long, actually. And that feels like a metaphor for something. Life just keeps on churning forward long after whatever drama happened, way in the past. Life keeps going and going. It gets boring, it becomes a new thing, and gets interesting again, and then that becomes boring, and then
that was actually with Song Exploder. I listened to 3 episodes in one day because I tend to binge listen to that show, and every single person directly cited David Bowie for an actual physical element of the song. They were this piano part was my little tribute to David Bowie. This guitar part was my tribute to David Bowie.
Wow.
And so I was wondering, is Rishi just going around asking everybody, so what part did David Bowie's death play?
Right. Wow.
In this song.
Gosh, that's really interesting. Yeah, I mean, those ripple effects of people who really do influence how other artists either view their work or create their work is really interesting. I went up to Portland to see Seu Jorge do his tribute to Bowie, because he's the guy that did all the acoustic covers of
Life
David.
Aquatic.
Yeah, Life Aquatic in Portuguese, and he's amazing. He was here. God, that was a long time ago. It must have been 2006 he was here. And I hadn't seen him since then. And those covers, like, listening to David Bowie, but then also listening to some of that sort of helped me get through that horrible loss of such an iconic musician,
I feel like David Bowie is the person that we are like, everyone is mourning in slow motion. Like, it's the longest funeral. Like, the decade following David Bowie's death is going to be the decade in which we mourned David Bowie.
I agree. He was such a titanic figure in just creatively, and he had the gift of being in the right place at the right time. But I think he was just also artistically, he made weird okay.
Yeah.
And for like an awkward, weird kid, that was really refreshing. That was like, hey, I can relate to this. I found my people, like.
They never taught us how to play. We learned to flow like wind and waves every day. They never taught us how to swim. We learned to drift on an endless sea easily. They never taught us how to sing. We learned to follow the drum inside. Come on, one more time. They never taught us how to breathe. We learned to listen for the wind outside.
Today's episode of The Last Podcast featured the voices of Christy Little and Monty Bohannon, and I guess also Angel Olsen, Annie Clark, and Dave Longstreth. It featured music from me and from Sun Ambulance, but mostly clips from the many times aforementioned Song Exploder. It's a great podcast, and you should subscribe if you haven't already. Special thanks to Chuck McMahon, Dan Hannon, Dan Freund. The Last Podcast will be back with new episodes in the near future. Sorry, this was always destined to be a haphazard season in terms of scheduling. See, we got a new co-host a couple weeks ago, and he can't talk yet, but I imagine he will have a significant impact going forward. We'll talk more about it soon. Thanks for listening.